Good evening, everyone. I'm Bob Kessler of the Vol Network. On behalf of the board and staff of the East Tennessee Historical Society, we want to welcome you tonight to this 2016 East Tennessean of the Year Award banquet. Welcome all our special guests, Commissioner Roy Kramer and his daughter Sarah Gray and son Steve and all their family that are here tonight with their friends. And it'll be a special night as we honor one of the great East Tennesseans. This time I'd like to call on ETSH board member Dr. George Schweitzer to give the blessing, and we'll get on with our dinner. Dr. Schweitzer.
For beauty in nature, your glory we see. For joy and health, friends and family. For daily provisions, your great mercy and care. These are the blessings you graciously share. So tonight, we offer this response of praise, for we long to heed you for all of our days. Amen.
Thank you, Doctor. Enjoy your meal. The program will start in just a few minutes. Tonight, and the program started. We welcome you again tonight to what would be a very, very special evening. It has been a rather remarkable couple of weeks when you look back and see that the Cubs won the World Series and what happened on Tuesday night. And now, Mr. Haslam, we hope the Browns are next. We hope they're next on the maybe tonight. Get a win tonight. Tonight we honor a remarkable man, Roy Kramer. Body of work that he changed college athletics. And we'll talk about that tonight a little bit. He was, of course, a Boy Scout in Maryville, went on to be the athletics director at Vanderbilt. He was a head football coach at Central Michigan, and, of course, changed the landscape of college football when he was in the Southeastern Conference. So not just football, but all the other sports. So we'll celebrate his remarkable career tonight, and we're glad he's here, and we're glad you're here as well. A couple of special guests that are with us tonight who worked with Mr. Kramer for a long, long time. Mark Womack, the Associate Commissioner of the Southeastern Conference. I know Mark's in the back. Mark, thanks for being here tonight. And also, there he is right there. Hey, Mark, I thought I should have known they put you right here in front. And then Jim Delaney, the Commissioner of the Big Ten Conference, is with us as well tonight. Jim, thanks for being here tonight. Everyone that's ever met or been around Roy Kramer knows that he's a remarkable man and a very smart man. And he told a story one time that talked about his negotiation skills, which were legendary. He was the head coach at Central Michigan, and he told this story once that he'd been there a couple years. He'd won 2 championships, and then Michigan hired a guy by the name of Bo Schembechler. And so Roy Kramer went into his athletics director and says, I need to be able to compete, and salary-wise, I need to be able to compete with Bo Schembechler. I can't recruit if Bo's making all this money, and I'm not making as much money as he is, so I need to be almost on a level playing field. And so after weeks of negotiation, he was very pleased that he got the salary he wanted. He got $16,000 a year in 1969. Bo Schembechler was making $17,000. Today, Jim Harbaugh, Roy, is making that every day at Michigan. And you're part of that because you changed the landscape so much. But we celebrate his career tonight, and we'll hear great stories and videos tonight. And we also celebrate the East Tennessee Historical Society for what they've done and how they preserve the history of East Tennessee. They've been doing it for 182 years, and they do it through their artifacts and their photographs. And East Tennessee Historical Society is a regional organization covering 35 counties and 50 affiliate chapters. And to tell you more about the award and more about the East Tennessee Historic Society, we want to bring up the ETHS Board President, Joe Emmert.
Thank you, Bob. I want to express the East Tennessee Historical Society's appreciation for joining us tonight to honor a great East Tennessean, and also someone I'm proud to call my uncle, Roy Kramer. In keeping with the Society's mission to preserve, interpret, and promote our history, the East Tennessee Historical Society Board of Directors established in 2011 a new award that will periodically recognize and honor an East Tennessee history maker. Honorees must be an ambassador for our region and represent integrity, dignity, leadership, and the volunteer spirit. The award is given by the board to an East Tennessean with either a recent accomplishment or a combination of accomplishments in fields such as history, politics, education, research, or humanitarian work that improves the lives of others. In 2011, the first recipient in the inaugural year for the award was Knoxville native Governor Bill Haslam. The first Knoxville native to be elected governor of Tennessee, and the second East Tennessean, the first being another Maryville boy, in the past 37 years. In 2014, America's favorite zookeeper and international animal advocate and Knoxville native Jack Hanna was honored in recognition of his lifelong efforts and commitment to making the world a better place for animals and people everywhere. Tonight we honor the third East Tennessean of the year, Roy Kramer, in recognition of his visionary leadership and positive impact on high school and collegiate athletics, student athletes, coaches, and administration over the course of his career. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And now it's my pleasure to introduce another great East Tennessean, a Blount County guy that has done remarkable things, governor for 2 terms, president of the University of Tennessee, U.S. Secretary of Education, and now, of course, serving his 3rd term as our United States Senator from the great state of Tennessee. Please welcome Lamar Alexander.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for the introduction. I found even though I've been around a long time, I still need it. I was in there are a number of people from Maryville and Blount County here today, and they'll appreciate this. I was in the food line in Blount County about a couple of months ago getting some food on my way home. And this woman about my age came up to me and put her arms around me and gave me a big kiss and said, "Thank you for everything you've done for us." And I don't remember that ever happening to me before, so I said, "Well, thank you." And she said, "You know, I sure wish you were still in public office." So, I appreciate the introduction. After a particularly difficult election, which a number of you have mentioned to me tonight, I welcome this opportunity to do what our late friend Alex Haley used to say, find the good and praise it, about two people. The first is you, the East Tennessee Historical Society, and the second, of course, is Maryville's own Roy Kramer. To Joe and to Natalie and Cheryl and the board, thank you for helping us remember who Tennessee's pioneers were, why they came here, and how they lived. Knowing more about them helps us understand more about who we are, why we're here, and how we live together. We East Tennesseans love telling stories about each other and about ourselves, and nobody does a better job of collecting and disseminating those stories than you do. One of the stories that just sticks in my mind came out of page 1 of the autobiography of the founder of this organization, Dr. J.G.M. Ramsey, where he writes that his great-grandmother, a Scotch-Irish Presbyterian, was traveling from Northern Ireland to America by ship by ship, and she fell overboard and was drowned as she crossed the Atlantic. Writes Dr. Ramsey, quote, "Her body could be seen floating on the sea sometime after the accident, being buoyed above the waves by the stuffed or quilted dresses which ladies wore at that early period in the high latitude from which they came." I've never been able to forget that paragraph in Dr. Ramsey's book. One reason I especially like this story is that Dr. Ramsey was the son of Francis Alexander Ramsey, who in 1783, at age 19, traveled 500 miles from backwoods Pennsylvania to backwoods Tennessee to live with his uncle, John Alexander, who was already there. And later, that same year, Ramsey and James White, who was the founder of Knoxville, came on down in this area, went all the way down to the Little Tennessee River. They were looking for the best land, and 3 years later, Ramsey took some of that for himself at Swan Pond. We call that the Ramsey House. My seventh generation grandfather became blind, moved to the Ramsey House, and is buried there. So thank you for the stories that you remind us of. Now for our honoree. The Birmingham News did a survey of the most influential persons in the history of the Southeastern Conference. Number 1, Bear Bryant. Number 2, Adolph Rupp. Number 3, Roy Kramer. I was president at UT when he arranged for Arkansas and South Carolina to join the Southeastern Conference. That was a mistake, based on last weekend. No, it's not. It was good. He was responsible for, and you'll hear more about this, for the division games, for the divisions, for the championship games, for the bowl championship series. He was on the NCAA basketball committee, helped negotiate contracts. Was named the NCAA Coach of the Year. Before all of that, he won 3 state championships in high school in Michigan. Some people would say that for a number of years he was the most influential figure in American college football, succeeded by people like his good friend Jim Delaney, who's here tonight, and Dave Hart and Womack. But others will talk about that in a few minutes, so tonight I'd like to talk about Maryville. I know something about Roy Kramer and Maryville because my father was his principal at Westside Elementary School when he was in the 6th grade. Westside Elementary School is about halfway between where the Kramers lived and where we lived. And in my mother's opinion, who taught a few people who were here, a good reason to do anything was because, as she would say, that's the way the Kramers do it. That's how much our family admired the family in which Roy grew up, even though Mr. Kramer was a Democrat. As far as my mother and my father was concerned, the Kramers did things the way things were supposed to be done. For example, when I decided to go to New York University to law school, my father, who saw no reason for me to leave Tennessee for law school in the first place, was sure that I was about to plunge into some communist-infested strange place in the north and never return. So his closing argument to me, trying to change my mind, was, why don't you go to Michigan? Mr. Kramer did. Mr. Kramer, Roy's dad, was a pioneer of sorts. He left Pennsylvania. He did go to Michigan, stayed a couple of years, learned enough law to practice it somewhere, and began to look for a place to do it. One story is he got to Etowah somehow, and somebody told him Alcoa was building a plant, so he came up to Maryville, and in 1913 he opened a practice. Being a wise Democrat, he formed a partnership with a good Republican, Major Will A. McTeer, who in July of 1862, with about 18 other Blount Countyans, went through the Cumberland Gap up to fight with the Union Army. Mr. Kramer went back to Pennsylvania, found Alice Arnold, married her, and when they came to Maryville, according to the family, Mrs. Kramer got off the train, got to Maryville, saw the muddy streets, remembered the paved roads of Pennsylvania, and began to cry. Mrs. Kramer was active in the Methodist Church, Sam Houston Schoolhouse. All of us who knew her considered her a formidable force. Once she was introduced as the entire chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution, causing someone in the back of the room to say, "She's not a chapter, she's the whole book." R.R. Kramer's law practice in Maryville prospered, as did his prominence in the Democratic Party. Roy remembers that when he was in about the 6th grade, the whole family was on the platform in September the 2nd, 1940, when President Roosevelt came to dedicate the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Roy remembers how shocked he was when, after the president's speech, men helped him into a wheelchair, because most Americans hadn't been allowed to see the fact that the president was crippled. Roy grew up in Maryville in the 1930s and 40s, the way a lot of boys grew up in the Maryville in the 1930s and 40s, playing on Pistol Creek, which was about the most trouble you could get into in those days. He and his brothers skinned muskrats. I did a little research with some of the other Maryvillians here. I don't know whether he got into smoking Indian cigars or not, like some did. But he became an Eagle Scout. He went to Camp Pellissippi in the summer. He graduated from Maryville High School. He played single-wing football at Maryville College. His brothers saw action in World War II, a lot of it. He was too young for that, but at his brother's advice, he joined the local National Guard unit after the war. At summer camp, the commanding officer the colonel ordered everybody to stand in formation. Roy thought they were going to be named the best unit, and the colonel said, "Men, the North Koreans have crossed the 19th parallel, and we're headed to help the South Koreans." There was a mess sergeant standing nearby who didn't hear exactly what the colonel said, and he said, Kramer, what did he say?" And Roy said, "I'm not sure, but I don't think we're going back to Maryville." At Maryville High School, Roy met Sarah Jo Emmert, the daughter of the editor of the Maryville Times. Joe Emmert's dad, Jim Emmert, was Sarah Jo's brother. They were married 62 years. Roy describes her as his sweetheart and head coach, who knew the name of every athletic director, coach, player, official, and janitor of every step of their journey in life, and usually the names of their wives and kids. Roy and Sarah Jo had 3 children, Steve, Sarah Gray, and Janie, 6 grandchildren. Steve remembers that Roy always taught his children the importance of history. When we would come back to Maryville in the summer from Michigan, he says, we would always swing by Gettysburg or Harper's Ferry or take a tour. Dad thought that was important. What I really wanted to say tonight in my introduction about Roy was that he was part of the Kramer family of Maryville, Tennessee, where the Alexanders and many other families learned to do things the way the Kramers did things. He may for a while have been the most influential figure in American college football. But the most important thing about Roy Kramer is that he does things the way they're supposed to be done. Now, as Paul Harvey used to say, for the rest of the story, which is mostly about football, I hope you'll watch with me some highlights of Roy's career and his career achievements as told in this ESPN video that first aired at the 2012 National College Football Association Awards, honoring Roy for his contributions to college football. Thank you.
I am retired. I live in a little town called Von Orr, Tennessee, out in the middle of nowhere. Pick up your golf clubs and try to play 1 or 2 holes every now and then is not a bad way to live your days. And to reflect on the things that took place over the last 50 or 60 years. I started out as a high school football coach in Michigan. Coached high school football for 12 years. Might have been the most enjoyable time of all. You really make a difference in high school, I think. It was a very enjoyable period. I was the head coach at Central Michigan University, Mount Pleasant, Michigan. We won the Division II National Championship there in 1974. From there, I went to Vanderbilt as the athletic director. I was there 12 years. I sort of lived my life in 12-year segments. And then from there to the Southeastern Conference. I was chosen in 1990 to be the commissioner. The first thing that occurred right after I became commissioner was the expansion of the conference from 10 to 12 teams.
We've long prided ourselves in being the great football conference in the nation, and I think this will certainly add to that. It's a totally new format, the idea of competing for a divisional championship, for the right to represent your area in the conference championship game.
There was a great deal of concern about the championship game. Our coaches were convinced that no one in the Southeastern Conference would ever win a national championship.
It just makes it another step tougher naturally. We're playing one more ball game. I think it's going to be very difficult for anyone to win a national championship.
Divisions and a championship game? I didn't know that was legal. I've already thought in college there's no such thing as playoffs, Division I college ball. But he got one started.
I spent a lot of hours talking to Roy about what was going on because I wasn't sure he was right. But he was not only smart and seasoned in the scripture of the South as far as football was concerned, but he was also crafty.
I just can't imagine the feeling he had walking into Legion Field. Lights are on, everybody's here. Man, I hope this works. Because it wasn't just the conference. It wasn't just college football. It was his career.
Alabama, number 2 team in the nation, trying to win their way to the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans, trying to win their way into a game against the Hurricanes of Miami.
I'm sure he was neutral as far as who he wanted to win, but at the same time, he didn't want his inaugural championship game to knock an SEC team out of the national championship picture.
Every eyeball that follows college football is watching. And I remember privately saying, uh-oh.
Went right down to the last minute.
Matthews goes back and throws. Intercepted by Langham! He's on his way. Touchdown, Alabama!
Made it possible for Alabama to move on and win a national championship, which, from my standpoint as commissioner, that was kind of a load off your back because it proved that it worked.
And that's why we have this crazy conference expansion mania today. It all started that night. I mean, there's no question about that.
Roy Kramer changed the way people thought about their conference, about how their conference was structured, and about postseason football.
The finances of the game have changed. Roy Kramer saw it, and that's what changed the finances of the game. That's what allowed a conference like the SEC, the Big 12, or the Pac-12 to become what it is.
Roy Kramer looked into the crystal ball that he had that nobody else had, quite frankly, and 20 years later, I think that first step that the SEC took, they still have that step out ahead of everybody else.
Auburn wins the BCS National Championship. And the SEC has now won 5 consecutive BCS National Championships.
He goes from creating the SEC championship game to creating the BCS.
They have accomplished with the BCS more than anybody ever dreamed they could. And Roy Kramer was a stout figure in that.
When you start talking about patriarchs in college football, people who have made changes that will endure, he's right up there at the very top.
I think there is a legacy there that sort of lifted college football to a new level. And as you sat back and reflect, this was unique, this was different, this will have an impact down the way.
Roy Kramer, you're my hero. You're the E.F. Hutton of college athletics. You're the person, when you speak, we all listen. I've often said, if Roy Kramer would speak at my funeral and Con Hunley would sing, I would go into heaven in style. But when I think about Roy Kramer, I think about your commitment to the SEC and your commitment to college athletics, and in particular to women's athletics. You were such a great supporter of what we did to make women's athletics in the SEC the best. I thank you, I love you, and you are the East Tennessean of the year.
Our first meeting as a young assistant football coach and you as the athletic director made a tremendous impression on me. How professional you were, how you laid out very clearly what the expectation was to be a coach in the Southeastern Conference and at Vanderbilt University. and especially the part about compliance, because you made it very clear if there was any compliance issues, I wouldn't be there very long. Well, that stayed with me for a long, long time, and the mentor that you were to me at that particular point in my life carried with me all through my career. I want to say thank you for your friendship, for your mentorship in a lot of different phases, and the kind of person that you are and an example that you've been to so many.
Roy, congratulations on the East Tennessean of the Year. You deserve it, and we appreciate you.
Coach, congratulations on being East Tennessean of the Year. It's a fantastic honor and very well deserved.
Remarkable story. And now to make the presentation to Roy Kramer, please welcome back Joe Emmert and the Executive Director, Cheryl Henderson, for the special presentation. Cheryl.
On behalf of the Board of Directors for the East Tennessee Historical Society, we're very proud to honor you, Uncle Roy, as East Tennessean of the Year. I'm very honored. I'm very honored to represent the board in this award, but I'm more honored to be your nephew. And let me just end by saying you always gave it your best. You left nothing on the field. You executed brilliantly. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jim.
At the East Tennessee Historical Society, we believe that a shared heritage and a sense of history are priceless gifts for ourselves and for generations to come. As one of our board members, Natalie Haslam, once observed, history gets exciting when it's personal. And we have a special gift for you, Mr. Kramer, one that will make your history exciting and personal. It's a gift that you can share with your family. It is my pleasure to present to you, as the 2016 East Tennessean of the Year, a compiled history of your Kramer family. This research documents your family connections to the Civil War and to your early immigrant ancestors, such as Peter Cray, born in Pennsylvania at the very early date of 1679, the churches your ancestors attended in Germany 3 centuries ago, and many other true stories and rich history that we want to give to you.
Thank you very much.
This is your family history.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much, Joe, and thank you very much, East Tennessee Historical Society. I'm not sure why I'm here tonight. After I listened to Lamar and watched that video, I almost thought I was at my funeral. But Lamar, to have you here as the premier citizen of Maryville, Tennessee, means a great deal to me. And I'll refer to your dad a little bit later when I make a remark or two, who was one of my very special heroes as I grew up. But Lamar has meant so much to this state, to this community. It's a real honor to have him here. I was completely blown away when I walked in and saw Jim Delaney.
Let me tell you about Jim. I knew Jim when he was an enforcement man with the NCAA. I knew him when he was the commissioner of the OVC, and I never thought he'd be the commissioner of the Big Ten. But let me tell you, Jim Delaney has had a greater impact over a longer period of time on what is right about college athletics than anybody I know. He was a true friend, he was a great supporter, and a great person to sound ideas off of when I was the commissioner. And for Jim to take time to be here tonight is a special honor to me. There are two other people I want to mention in particular, Mark Womack and Catherine Switzer from the SEC. Mark Womack has been the right hand of, I'm trying to count here, Mark, I at least think 5 commissioners. He knows where every skeleton is buried in the SEC. He knows every controversy that we have ever gone through. But most of all, he's the most loyal individual I have ever met in a lifetime. And Mark, for you to be here is special. And then there's Catherine Switzer, administrative assistant to the commissioner, and really has been the commissioner ever since I brought her upstairs from her previous job working with officials. Everybody should get out of that job at some time during their lifetime. But Catherine was, and still is, the real heart and soul of getting all kinds of things organized in the conference every single day. And Catherine, it's special to have you here tonight. It's special to have a number of other people here. I know this organization is deeply indebted to a lot of people in this community, and to have you here for this occasion is very special to me. When Jim Haslam called me about this event, the first thought I had was Jim was looking for somebody that was older than him. The second thought I said, is this your idea? And I knew it wasn't. It was Natalie's. So I said to Jim, I'm not going to do it for you, but I will do it for Natalie. So I guess that's why I'm here tonight. When I began to think about this evening a few weeks ago, I decided that perhaps I should go visit the East Tennessee Historical Museum once again and refresh my memory of what this was all about. And then I would spend a few minutes and get oriented to the Historical Society. As I entered, the first thing I saw was that magnificent portrait of Natalie. Jim, you are really a lucky man, because I've seen your picture in the old 1958 roster of Tennessee, and she didn't get a bargain, you did. But as I entered, I saw that streetcar and said to myself, I can remember streetcars on Gay Street. And so I strolled along to the exhibit of the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. I remembered, as a young lad, driving into Cades Cove across Rich Mountain on a single-lane road where you had to stop if you met somebody and back up. I can remember sitting on the porch of Aunt Becky Cable's house in the Cove with my dad and Mr. John Oliver, that was Wayne's brother, Lamar, as they were able to get Miss Becky to sign the papers when her mill and her house were taken by the park. I can remember, as Lamar pointed out, sitting on the terrace of Newfoundland Gap on that day in September 1940 when Franklin Roosevelt dedicated the park. The site the Cherokees always referred to as the place of the blue smoke. and realizing, as Lamar said, for the first time, that the president was a cripple. I moved along to the World War II exhibit, and I can remember very vividly sitting in my living room with my older brothers, listening to the Pro Championship game between the Chicago Bears and the Washington Redskins with Sid Luckman and Sammy Ball, when the program was interrupted to tell us that the Japanese had invaded Pearl Harbor. As I walked along in that museum, in that exhibit, I saw a banner with a blue star. And I can remember very vividly that in our window at 329 Kate Street, a banner with 3 stars hung in the windows of that house for almost 4 years, as my older brothers served all across the world in World War II. I found pictures of various towns and villages, and I remember driving down to Madisonville on a Sunday afternoon was a big event, primarily because we got to cross the Little Tennessee River on old Mr. Niles's ferry, for there were no bridges across the river at that point. And on the way home, counting all the barns that were painted Sea Rock City. I remember Hudsons and Terraplanes and DeSotas and Packards. I remember driving to Gatlinburg for Sunday brunch when the old Mountain View Hotel was the principal structure in Gatlinburg. I can remember being at the dedication of Norris Dam and the coming of TVA. As I strolled on farther, I came to the section on country music. How vividly I can remember the most famous radio program this town ever had, the Midday Merry-Go-Round, with the one and only Lowell Blanchard, and his interview with the man on the street. He also broadcast the Knoxville Smoky baseball games, and I don't think he ever attended them. He did it off of the ticker tape. But he was responsible for introducing the likes of Archie Campbell and Chet Atkins and Roy Acuff to country music. And speaking of Roy Acuff, I remember very vividly when he came to Maryville in that old park down below the courthouse when he was running for governor of the state of Tennessee. And he played the Great Speckled Bird and sang it on his fiddle. And then he took the fiddle and balanced it on his chin and told everybody there that he was going to balance the budget of the state of Tennessee like he balanced the fiddle on his chin. It didn't quite work, but it was a good story. I can remember taking a White Star Line bus to Knoxville on a Saturday morning, getting off on Henley Street, walking down Cumberland Avenue to Ellison Ernest Drugstore, turning left and going down the street and buying a kid's ticket for 50 cents to sit on that grass hill on the north end of Shield Watkins Field. But more importantly, for the historians and Gus Manning, who's here, I remember very clearly that afternoon in October of 1939, being in Shield Watkins Field when Johnny Butler made his famous 50-yard run to beat Alabama. And the general took what was probably his most famous team to a conclusion of undefeated, untied, and unscored on. But you know, last week when South Carolina beat Tennessee and I tuned into the call-in shows and saw all the comments being made, I couldn't help but think, what if those people had been here on January the 1st, 1940, when the Generals team, so famous, so well known, lost to Southern Cal 14-0 in the Rose Bowl. I couldn't help but think the General was looking down and saying, thank God there was no internet, no call-in shows, and no Twitter. I can remember very clearly my first high school football game when I was a sophomore at Maryville High School. We played Von Orr High School. The field was only 90 yards long because the railroad track cut off the end of the field. So when you got going in that one direction to the 10-yard line, they moved the ball back to the 20. And if you broke loose for a touchdown, you had to run all the way through the end zone and out the other end before it counted. As Lamar said, I can certainly remember West Side School and Andy Alexander, the principal. He always came out at recess when we tried to steal across the street to the J&K grocery store to get candy and would tell us not to do that or we would be in his office. What a great man, but even more so I can remember many years later when I was at Vanderbilt, late in an afternoon my secretary would come running in all aflutter and say, the governor's office is on the phone. I said, oh, relax. It's just Andy wanting to go to the Vanderbilt basketball game tonight. And it was, as Lamar can remember. What a great man. I can remember the first Saturday before Thanksgiving in Maryville when old Mr. Dave Prophet would release live turkeys from the second-story window of Prophet's department store, and people would run down the street to get their Thanksgiving dinner. I certainly can remember how and realize how depressed I was when I finally found out that most of my toys on Christmas Eve didn't come from Santa Claus, but came from Woodruff's Hardware on Gay Street. I can remember buying my first suit when my oldest brother got married for $19.95 at George's department store. I can even remember buying a loaf of bread at Kaz Walker's with the sign of the scissors, always cutting prices. I can remember driving to Knoxville on the old Knoxville Highway because that was the only way to get here, by way of Rockford and Vestal. And halfway there, stopping at the sign of the dinosaur, Sinclair Gas, and filling up for 15 cents a gallon, long before there was ever a pilot station in sight. I can remember saving up money to be able to take my dear wife, Sarah Jo, on one of our earliest dates to Johnson Hall in the old Andrew Johnson Hotel, one of the most prestigious places, I thought, to dine in Knoxville at that time. I can remember going to the Golden Gloves boxing tournament because one of our buddies was in it at the Bijou Theater. And I also can remember taking in a baseball game at Old Caswell Park when the Memphis Chicks came to town with their famous outfielder, the one-armed outfielder, Pete Gray. I certainly can remember attending the premiere showing of Gone with the Wind at Tennessee Theater. But more than that, I remembered the fact that we went to dinner at the S&W cafeteria with the organ playing all of the hits of the time. I finally glanced at my watch that day and realized I had been in the East Tennessee Historical Museum for almost 4 hours. I had relived the early years of my life, but more significantly, the lives of the Cherokees who roamed these hills so long ago. The pioneers like John Sevier, William Blount, James Robertson, Sam Houston, who built the foundation of the way of life we have been so blessed to inherit in these green acres located in the shadows of the Great Smoky Mountains, along the banks of the Clinch, the French Broad, the Holston, as they flow to form the giant Tennessee River. and the endless and fertile valleys of red clay, stretching from Bristol to Chattanooga, from Jellicoe to Ducktown and Copper Hill. That's why we're gathered here tonight, not to honor an old gray-haired man of yesteryear, but rather to honor the rich heritage of the place we call home, East Tennessee. Thank you very much.
Wonderful job. Thank you. Congratulations, Roy Kramer, on a great award for a great man. We're going to close the program tonight with a special treat. We want to bring up Senator Alexander one more time, and he is going to play one of our favorite songs and one more quick tribute to Roy Kramer to close out the evening tonight. So welcome again, Senator Lamar Alexander.
Roy, from everybody here, that was an extraordinary history lesson. Thank you so much for that. I was asked to play the Tennessee Waltz. I will do that. Frank Gray says it's not much of a piano. I'm not much of a piano player, so we're even on that. But I'll give you about 2 minutes of history, which you might not know, in keeping with the evening, about the Tennessee Waltz. In 1946, right after World War II, Red Stewart and Pee Wee King, two songwriters, were driving from Memphis to Nashville before the interstates, and one turned to the other and said, well, if Missouri has a waltz and Kentucky has a waltz, why doesn't Tennessee have a waltz? And so driving along, maybe drinking beers or not, I don't know, they took a penny matchbox, emptied the wooden matches all on the floorboard of the car, and on the back of it, they wrote lyrics to a melody that they knew and played a lot, which was called the No Name Waltz. When they got to Nashville, Pee Wee King, the next day, put the notes and the words on what's called a lead sheet, took it to Fred Rose, a publisher. Fred Rose looked at it. He changed one phrase on it. The phrase was, it said, oh, the Tennessee Waltz, the Tennessee Waltz. And Fred Rose struck through that and put, I remember the night in the Tennessee Waltz. Well, they played it, sang it a few times. Nobody paid any attention until Mercury Records had a hit record that they thought would be a hit record called Boogie Woogie Santa Claus. And they got the hottest young singer of the day, Patti Page, 1948 or 9, to fly to New York and record Boogie Woogie Santa Claus. They had to put something on the back of the record, and so they just slapped the Tennessee Waltz on the back of it. It sold 10 million copies. It was the last song ever to sell more than 1 million sheets of music. It's the most recorded song ever by a female artist. It's probably the most famous country music song, and in Nashville they call it the Magna Carta of country music. In 2013, our son found that lead sheet that Pee Wee King had written on. The reason we know it was, we got it from the people who had sung in that group or their children. Marked through it are the words, I remember the night in the Tennessee Waltz. And a group of families bought it. We tried to think of where would be the appropriate place for it to be, and gave it to the Natalie Haslam School of Music at the University of Tennessee. So the lead sheet of the Magna Carta of country music is in its rightful place at the Natalie Haslam School of Music in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I'm now going to play that.
thank you all so much for being here. Again, congratulations to Roy Kramer. Well-deserved award. What a special person he is here in East Tennessee. Thanks to the East Tennessee Historical Society. Also, thanks to ESPN and River Media for all their help tonight. You have a wine glass at your setting. That's your souvenir for tonight, so you can remember the evening. Take that home with you tonight. Thanks for being here again. Drive safely on your way home.